Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a kind of special case here. I mean, they're all special cases. This, let me show you what we're looking at. This is going to be a Dell Optiplex 3040. It's a refurbished unit, and this one, we found the paperwork on this. We've got to flip the paperwork around. I got stuff on here. Okay, so as you can see, it went through a power surge ASAP. Now, we could go into diagnosis on this thing. As far as short detection on the motherboard, but we're not going to go that far because we do have a spare board. But being that this got hit, what is wrong there? Being this got hit by a power surge, we have to be sure that it is indeed the motherboard. And let's take our faceplate off before we break any of that. You can see everything's still together there. All right, we need to, we don't need that off, so we can leave that on the back. We're going to spring this open. We don't really need to disconnect anything over here, but we do need to make sure that it's the motherboard and not the power supply. However, we're going to run into a problem with the power supply. Let me show you that. So this is a Dell proprietary power supply. It is, what does it say there? Can you tell me some numbers? 240 watt Dell power supply. Which is your 12 volt rail. And then you have this other goofy connector, which is an 8-pin. Looks kind of like a PCI Express. Let's see if it slots into PCI Express socket. It should. There's my 6-pin or 8-pin. So it will plug into a PCI Express socket. However, it is not pinned out near the same. Anyhow, the pin out on these, when we're looking at it like this, let's see if we can zoom this in. So when we're looking at it as it would be plugged into the motherboard. So we're going to have our 12 volt standby. We're going to have 2 grounds, and then we'll have 5 volt power OK, 2 12 volt, and then our 5 volt power switch. Basically, that's the order they go in. Now, because this will plug into an 8-pin socket for testing on a power adapter, does not mean that you can test it. It's nowhere near the same with the pinout, so you don't want to go and do that. Now, when we plug this one in, let's see what we can do. We'll plug that back in. We're plugged in there. We want to run our power plugged in. We want to run a power cable to the power supply. And we just get spin. So let's see if we can shut this thing off by holding in the power button. So I'm currently holding in the power button. And nothing happens. If we take a moment and look at the back, we can see that we don't have our little light, and hitting this does nothing. So that may lead somebody down the path of, oh wow, our power supply is broken. You can put power to these systems, and right now we're going to check to make sure that it isn't the power supply. You know, the RAM, you can test that easy. You could pull this RAM, test it in something else, or test RAM in here once you get it running. CPU, same story. Test it in another board or test another CPU in here. The power supply, whenever it's plugged in, we could get our multimeter out and test each one of the points to see if we get what we need, and it may show or not show. What we're going to do now, though, is we're going to unplug here and unplug here and use a made-in-shop adapter. You can buy these off the shelf, but here's an 8-pin PCI Express cable that some wires are not connected on, and then we have, this is direct off of a 24-pin. This is a 24-pin motherboard socket, right off of a motherboard. I pulled it off a dead motherboard. Get this in here. So there's the 2 pins that we would jump. We have our two 12-volt wires. We have 2 coming off of one, and then this is a third one because we need 3 12-volt signals going to our socket that plugs in here on the motherboard. And we skip the purple wire. The gray wire comes out as well. And then we're going to use this ground and then one further ground because we have 2 ground wires. That's all your wires. And then those would go to your 8-pin PCI Express connector. I'm just using the 8-pin PCI Express because the layout, the outer shapes of each of these pins are the same, although it's not pinned out the same. What we want to do is we're going to plug this into the motherboard. We have our one wire that is not connected and one further that is not connected. I'm going to throw them off to the side. We don't want them touching anything. We are plugged in to our power supply. We don't want that, definitely don't want that touching anything. And then we're going to run our standard ATX, or our standard PC power supply. So let's go ahead, we'll switch the power on it to off. And this is telling us whether our power supply is bad or our motherboard is bad, basically, getting to the point on this one. So we're going to switch on. As soon as we switch on, we can see that we have the same behavior. It powers up, and when we close this up a little and hit our power button, I'm holding it in, it will not power on or off. There's just no behavior, indicating that our known good power supply and our Dell power supply both have the same behavior right now. Go ahead and switch that back off. We're going to unplug, get our little goofy adapter out of here. And then very quickly, with aid of another motherboard, we're going to test our components. One other thing I want to do now that we're unplugged from the motherboard, I want to plug power into my Dell power supply and see. All right, so we're not getting a power light here, and that's likely because it's not plugged in to anything on the motherboard. Doesn't mean it's bad, just still nothing. Whenever a computer gets hit with lightning or hit with a power surge, a pretty heavy power surge, or even a light one, it can damage different things. What we want to know is what's good, what isn't. Wow, look at that thermal paste. There's barely any even left there. Right, we've got CPU, we've got RAM, power supply. We can skip on that for the time being. Get out of the way. We don't have the factory power switch, so we're likely going to get a power switch error message. But we can plug in a power. Is that power switch? Yes, it is. We have our power button here. This thing is more than likely going to turn on as soon as we plug in power here, and it gets some power. It should turn on. However, we should be able to at least turn it off with our power button. Oh, we need HDMI. Let's get HDMI and mouse and keyboard as well. So here goes. There's HDMI, mouse and keyboard. So we at least have those and see what the story is. Do we have bad components still to diagnose, or was it just a bad motherboard? We have our mouse. How can we do this? Can we send this out there? Sure, we can send this out to OBS. 100% we can. Let me get the cable. And just so we have our own reference, I'm going to leave it plugged into the KVM monitor over here, but we're going to run out from an HDMI splitter. All right, time to do it. Let's do it. We're going to power this guy up. Let's go to F2 on our keyboard. All right, we have the Dell logo. Is there a way to do this? There we go. So there's our Dell. It's up and running. Dell support assistance detected. Okay, check the following cable alert. Power button cable. Okay, and that's because we don't have our factory power button out of the case plugged in. We could plug it in and get rid of that. We determine it's good. That's with our adapter and our testing power supply. Now the next question, does it work in the case? We could pull the power supply out, which is 3 bolts, or pull all the bolts to get this motherboard in and disconnect all the wires. In order to save time, I think we'll go with the one option. Being that the system board was dead, I'm going to flip to here until I see if it gets past the login with the name. Being that the system board was dead, we had no way of telling what the BIOS settings were. Being what generation this hardware is, it's more than likely that it was set to UEFI with secure boot. So we'll see if that gets to a desktop or if it crashes. And is there anything on the desktop revealing? No. There we go, working desktop. Obviously, we can't call the end of it here. We're going to run some stability tests, but that is the end of the video. So it's working. All's well. It ends well. We can pop that up there, a little screen, and talk about this. I have seen this before with power surges, especially on the 3040, the older Optiplex 7010s, the 980s, 790s, whatever. The older ones, they all behave a little different with power surges, but I have seen this before, especially with the 3040, where it gets hit by a power surge and everything survives except the motherboard. If you do this, if you get into the tinker and the messing, the doing, you know, somebody needs something fixed, give them a hand getting it fixed. Save the size of the scrap heap, the landfill, the e-waste. Preserve this awesome island Earth that we all inhabit and should share together. Sadly, we don't. Thank you for clicking the link, coming over, hanging out. If you're not subscribed, now's a good time to do so. Why do I put it at the end like a dummy, like a complete fool? I do. We will see you next time. Fix something else in the next video, hopefully. We don't always get them. Sometimes there's failures. Sometimes successes. It's all part of the job. See you soon, people.